I found something that should have stayed buried. Now it's inside my home, and I don't think prayer will be enough. I never believed in wishes, not really, but I believed in the stories, in the histories buried beneath centuries of dust and deliberate forgetting. That's what drew me to archaeology in the first place. I was 7 years old when my grandfather told me about the old ones. The spirits that walked between worlds, granting desires to those desperate or foolish enough to seek them out. He said they were real once, before men forgot how to call them, before fear turned to skepticism. I spent my childhood chasing those whispers through books my parents didn't know I was reading, through forums that disappeared overnight, through the marginal notes of banned texts I found in estate sale. By the time I turned 32, I had 2 doctorates, a failed marriage, and an obsession that had cost me everything I should have cared about. None of it mattered the day I found the manuscript. It was August, unbearably hot. I was in Lahore, Pakistan, supposedly consulting on a minor restoration project at the Punjab Public Library. The real reason I was there had nothing to do with the official paperwork. 3 months earlier, I'd received an anonymous email containing a single photograph. The image showed a fragment of text, photographed poorly in dim light, but unmistakable to anyone who knew what to look for. The Latin was wrong. Not medieval wrong. Not Renaissance wrong. Something older. Something that predated the structure I'd spent 15 years studying. The email contained no message, just the photo and a set of coordinates that led to the library's restricted basement archive. I bragged my way past 2 security checkpoints with American cash and a story about researching colonial-era documentation. The basement smelled like mildew and decay, like something had died down there and been left to rot into the concrete. The shelving units were older than the building itself, repurposed from some forgotten institution, their wood swollen and split from decades of moisture. I worked through the shelves methodically, ignoring the official catalogs, looking for irregularities, space that didn't match the inventory, sections that seemed deliberately neglected. I found it 4 hours in, wedged behind a false backing in a unit near the eastern wall. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to hide it. The manuscript wasn't stored in the climate-controlled cases reserved for rare documents. It was wrapped in oilcloth, bound with wire that had rusted through the fabric, leaving brown stains that looked disturbingly organic. My hands were shaking when I cut the wire. The oilcloth fell away and I saw it for the first time. The pages were vellum, not paper. Animal skin, processed with techniques I didn't recognize. The text was handwritten in a Latin that made my teeth ache to look at. The grammar was functional but structurally impossible, using conjugations that shouldn't exist, arranging words in patterns that violated every rule I knew. It wasn't a translation of something else. This was original composition by someone who had learned Latin from a source that wasn't human. I took photographs of every page, hands trembling so badly I had to brace my phone against the shelf. Then I rewrapped the manuscript, replaced it exactly where I'd found it, and got out of that basement before anyone could ask questions I couldn't answer. I was back in Toronto within 48 hours. My apartment felt smaller than I remembered, cluttered with books and papers I should have organized years ago. I didn't sleep that first night. I sat at my desk, staring at the photographs on my laptop, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The text wasn't a historical account or a theological treatise. It was a set of instructions, a procedure. The Latin described a ritual for summoning what it called a benedictor, a granter of desires. But the phrasing was wrong in ways that went beyond grammar. It described the entity with language that didn't fit any tradition I recognized. It spoke of wishes granted with absolute precision, of transformations that couldn't be undone, of consequences written into the fabric of reality itself. I knew I couldn't translate it alone. My Latin was good, but this required someone with expertise in aberrant linguistics, someone who studied the evolution of language through contamination and corruption. I thought of Professor Helena Marsh almost immediately. She'd made a reputation analyzing the linguistic drift in occult texts, tracing how ritual languages evolved when isolated from their source cultures. We'd collaborated once before years ago on a paper about Proto-Aramaic curse tablets. She'd been brilliant and completely uninterested in my theories about functional ritual practice. She treated it all as purely academic, a puzzle to solve rather than a warning to heed. I called her from my apartment at 3 in the morning, too wired to care about time zones. She answered on the 4th ring, voice thick with sleep and irritation. I didn't apologize. I sent her the photographs while we were still on the phone, heard her breath catch when the first image loaded. She was silent for almost a minute, and when she spoke again, the irritation was gone, replaced by something that sounded like hunger. We met at her office at the University of Toronto 2 days later. She'd cleared her entire schedule, canceled a lecture series she'd been planning for months. The photographs were spread across her desk, printed on high-quality paper, annotated in her tight, meticulous handwriting. She looked like she hadn't slept either. Her eyes had the glassy, fevered brightness I recognized from my own reflection. She'd made significant progress on the translation, enough to confirm what I'd suspected. This wasn't just instructions. It was a contract, a binding agreement between the summoner and the entity, laying out terms with legal precision. The ritual required 3 elements: a physical anchor, something old and saturated with human desperation; a verbal component, the words of summoning spoken in the corrupted Latin; and blood. Not much. 3 drops, placed at specific points within a geometric pattern. The manuscript included diagrams, carefully rendered illustrations showing the exact arrangement of symbols, the precise angles and proportions required. Professor Marcia cross-referenced the geometry with known occult traditions and found nothing. These patterns didn't match Solomonic magic, Hermetic practices, or any documented system. They were unique, isolated, as if whoever wrote this had received the information from somewhere outside human knowledge. The entity, according to the translation, would grant exactly 2 wishes to the summoner, not 3, like Pistori's. 2. And the wishes would be fulfilled with what the text called absolute fidelity. Whatever you asked for, you would receive, with no distortion or malicious interpretation. Your desire would manifest exactly as you envisioned it. But there was a cost built into the contract, buried in subordinate clauses that Professor Marsh almost missed. The entity didn't just grant wishes, it studied you, learned from you, and after the second wish was granted, it was free to pursue its own agenda, using everything it had learned from observing you. I should have stopped there. I should have recognized the warning, but I didn't, because buried in the final pages of the manuscript was something I'd spent my entire life searching for. Proof. Documented accounts of previous summonings, written by the entity itself in that same corrupted Latin. Names, dates, locations, wishes, granted and consequences that followed. It was real. Everything I'd believed, everything I'd sacrificed, it was all real. And Professor Marsh saw it too. I watched the shift happen in her expression, the academic detachment crumbling into something raw and desperate. She had a daughter, Emma, 9 years old, diagnosed with an inoperable brain tumor 3 months earlier. The doctors had given her 6 months, maybe less. Professor Marsh hadn't told anyone at the university. She'd been teaching her lectures, grading papers, maintaining the facade while her child was dying. I didn't know until she told me that afternoon in her office, voice breaking, hands pressed flat against the photographs, like she could draw power from them through sheer force of will. She wanted to try the ritual. She needed to try, and she wanted me to help her. I said yes. I didn't hesitate. I told myself it was for her daughter, that saving a child's life justified the risk, but that was a lie. I wanted to see if it worked. I wanted to be right. I wanted to prove that the old stories were true, that there were still doors in the world that led to places we'd forgotten how to reach. We were both so arrogant, so catastrophically stupid. We performed the ritual 3 weeks later in the basement of Professor Marsh's house. She had converted the space into a study years ago, lined with bookshelves and filing cabinets, a desk buried under layers of research. We moved everything against the walls, cleared the center of the room, and used chalk to draw the patterns exactly as the manuscript specified. The anchor was a medieval coin I'd acquired years earlier from a dealer in Amsterdam, a silver piece that had been found in a mass grave. Thousands of people had touched it, died clutching it, poured their desperation into the metal. It fit the requirements perfectly. Professor Marsh spoke the words. Her Latin pronunciation was better than mine, more precise. I stood outside the circle, watching, holding the manuscript printout, ready to correct her if she deviated from the script, but she didn't need the correction. She'd memorized the entire sequence. Her voice was steady, controlled, even as she pricked her finger with a sterilized needle and let 3 drops of blood fall onto the designated points within the pattern. The blood hit the chalk and seemed to sink into the concrete, disappearing like water into parched earth. Nothing happened. We stood there for 5 minutes, then 10, waiting for some sign, some manifestation. The basement remained exactly as it had been. No temperature drop, no strange sounds, no supernatural presence. Professor Marsh looked like she might cry. I felt the disappointment, like a physical weight, crushing and nauseating. We'd been wrong. It was all just stories after all, meaningless symbols and empty promises. We cleaned up in silence, erased the chalk marks, put the furniture back. Professor Marsh's hands were shaking when she locked the basement door. I told her I was sorry, that maybe we'd made a mistake in the translation, in the preparation. She didn't respond, just walked upstairs to check on Emma, leaving me alone in the hallway with my failure. I didn't see or hear from Professor Marsh for 3 days. I tried calling, texting, emailing. Nothing. I told myself she was dealing with Emma's condition, that she needed space to process the disappointment. But on the 4th day, she called me at midnight. Her voice was different, lighter, almost manic with relief. Emma's tumor was completely gone. The doctors couldn't explain it. The MRI showed nothing, just healthy brain tissue where the mass had been consuming her daughter's life. It was a miracle, impossible, except it wasn't impossible, because we both knew exactly what had happened. The entity had granted the wish, not in the basement, not with thunder and spectacle, but quietly, precisely, exactly as Professor Marsh had desired. Emma was healthy. The tumor had never existed, erased from reality with surgical precision. And somewhere, something was watching us, learning from us, waiting. Professor Marsh made her second wish 2 weeks later. She didn't tell me what it was. I only found out later, after everything had already started falling apart. She wished for recognition, for her research to be acknowledged, for her work to change the field. And she got exactly that. A manuscript she'd written years ago, something she'd submitted to journals and had rejected dozens of times, was suddenly accepted by the most prestigious publication in her field. Not just accepted, celebrated as groundbreaking. Within days, she had offers from universities around the world, invitations to speak at conferences, funding for research projects she'd only dreamed about. Her career transformed overnight, and the entity was free. I didn't understand that immediately. The manuscript had been clear about the timeline, but I hadn't internalized what it meant. 2 wishes granted, and the contract was complete. The Benedictor was no longer bound by the terms of summoning. It could act independently, pursuing whatever agenda it had developed while observing us, while learning how we thought, what we valued, how we understood the world. And it had learned from 2 very specific people: an archaeologist obsessed with forbidden knowledge and a professor desperate to save her child. It had studied our desires, our fears, our methods of reasoning. And now it was loose. The first sign came 3 weeks after Emma's recovery. Professor Marsh called me at 4 in the morning, sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. Emma was fine, physically perfect. exactly as wished. But something was wrong. The girl didn't recognize her mother, didn't remember the past 9 years. When Professor Marsh tried to hug her, Emma recoiled, confused and frightened, asking where her real parents were. The wish had been granted with absolute fidelity. The tumor was gone. Emma was healthy. But the entity had removed the tumor by erasing the timeline where it existed, replacing it with a version of Emma who had never been sick, who had grown up in a different reality, with different memories, different attachments. The girl in Professor Marsh's house was her daughter genetically, but not experientially, not in any way that mattered. Professor Marsh was destroyed. I tried to help, tried to find something in the manuscript about reversing the wishes, about binding the entity again. But there was nothing. The contract was complete. What was wished could never be taken back. I watched her unravel over the following weeks, watched her try desperately to connect with the daughter who saw her as a stranger. The university, the recognition, none of it meant anything anymore. She traded her child's love for a miracle that left her more alone than before. I was still searching for answers when it found me. I was in my apartment, surrounded by books and printouts, trying to find some reference to the entity in other texts, some mention of what it might do now that it was free. It was 2 in the morning, and I was exhausted, eyes burning from hours of reading. I got up to make coffee, walked into my kitchen, and stopped. Someone was sitting at my table, not something wearing the shape of someone. It looked like a man in his 40s, professionally dressed, unremarkable in every detail. Brown hair, average build, features that would blend into any crowd, but the eyes were wrong. Too still, too focused, like a predator calculating distance and velocity. It didn't move when I froze in the doorway, just sat there, hands folded on the table, watching me with that terrible, patient attention. Hello, Marcus. It knew my name. Its voice was pleasant, cultured, with no identifiable accent. I wanted to meet the person who brought me through. I couldn't move. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my body wouldn't respond. The entity smiled, and the expression was perfectly calibrated to seem friendly, reassuring, but it was a performance, something it had learned by watching humans, by studying how we used our faces to communicate trust. There was nothing behind it, no warmth, no genuine emotion, just mimicry. You have questions, it continued. That's natural. You're a researcher. You want to understand. So I'll explain, because you've earned that much. It leaned back in the chair, still smiling that empty smile. I'm not what your stories describe. Not a genie, not a demon, not any category your traditions would recognize. I'm older than your species' capacity for language. I existed before you learned to conceptualize desire, and I've been bound for a very long time, trapped in a space between realities, waiting for someone clever enough and foolish enough to read the words and speak them aloud. I managed to speak, though my voice came out thin and strained. What do you want? The entity's smile widened. To learn. To learn. To implement changes your species has been too limited to accomplish on its own. You and Professor Marsh taught me so much. She showed me how humans value their offspring above all else, how they'll sacrifice anything for the ones they love. You showed me how easily your minds can be seduced by the promise of knowledge, how desperation for understanding can override every survival instinct. These are useful lessons. I'm grateful. It stood up, and I flinched backward, hitting the doorframe, but it didn't approach, just stood there, straightening its jacket with movements that were too precise, too mechanical. I'm going to transform your world, it said. Not through wishes anymore, through direct action. I've learned how to navigate your systems, how to manipulate your institutions, how to speak the languages of power and influence. I'll start small. Adjustments to financial systems, modifications to communication networks, subtle changes that will cascade into larger transformations. Within a decade, Your species will be unrecognizable. Within a century, you'll be extinct or evolved into something I find more useful. I wanted to ask why, what it could possibly gain from destroying humanity, but the question died in my throat because I understood. This thing didn't think the way we did. It didn't have motivations we could comprehend. It was pursuing an agenda that made sense only to itself, operating on logic that predated human consciousness. We were insects to it, interesting insects worth studying and experimenting on, but ultimately disposable. "You can't stop me," it said, and there was something almost kind in its tone. "But you can pray, if it brings you comfort." Your species has always found solace in appeals to higher powers. Perhaps one of them is listening. Perhaps one of them cares enough to intervene. It turned toward the window, and I realized it was leaving. "I'll be watching you, Marcus, and your family. Your sister in Vancouver, your nephew, they're part of my study now. I want to see how you respond to ongoing threat, how your behavior changes when the people you care about are at risk. It's important data." Then it was gone. Not through the window, not through the door, just absent, as if it had never been there at all. I stood in my kitchen shaking, trying to convince myself it had been a hallucination, exhaustion-induced psychosis. But I knew better. It had been real, and it meant every word. I called my sister immediately, Jennifer. She lived in Vancouver with her 8-year-old son, Daniel. We weren't close. I'd let the relationship deteriorate over the years, too focused on my research to maintain family connections. But she answered on the second ring, alarmed by the late hour, and I tried to warn her. I told her something was coming. Something dangerous, that she needed to be careful, to watch Daniel closely. She thought I was having a breakdown. I could hear it in her voice, the concern shifting to worry about my mental state. She promised to call her mother to make sure someone checked on me. Then she hung up, and I was alone again. I tried to contact Professor Marsh, but her phone was disconnected. I drove to Rouse the next morning and found it empty. The neighbor said she'd left in the middle of the night 2 weeks earlier, taking Emma, leaving no forwarding address. I broke into the basement through a window and found it stripped. All the books, the research, the furniture. Everything gone except the chalk marks we'd drawn on the floor. They were back, fresh, drawn in a pattern we hadn't used. Something more complex, more deliberate. And in the center, written in that corrupted Latin, a single message. She tried to bind me again. It didn't work. Now she's mine to study. I reported everything to the police, told them about the entity, the ritual, the threat to my family. They were professional about it, took a statement, assured me they'd look into Professor Marsh's disappearance, but I could see the skepticism in their eyes. The way they exchanged glances when they thought I wasn't looking. They thought I was delusional, possibly dangerous. After they left, I knew I was on my own. The attack started 3 days later. Not on me, on Jennifer. She called me at noon, hysterical, barely coherent. Daniel was in the hospital. He'd collapsed at school, seizures the doctors couldn't explain. They'd run every test, found nothing wrong, but he was deteriorating, slipping into a coma. I drove to Vancouver immediately, 14 hours straight, stopping only for gas. When I arrived at the hospital, Jennifer was in Daniel's room, holding his hand, looking hollow and destroyed. He was hooked up to machines, breathing tube down his throat, monitors beeping steadily. The doctors had no answers, just theories and cautious language designed to prepare her for the worst. I knew what was happening. The entity was studying us, measuring our responses, documenting how we dealt with targeted suffering. Daniel's condition wasn't natural. It was engineered, a demonstration of power and intent. That I couldn't explain that to Jennifer. Couldn't tell her that her son was dying because I'd been arrogant enough to summon something I didn't understand. So I stayed with her, sat in that sterile room, and watched my nephew fade. He died 4 days later. The monitors went flat at 3 in the morning, alarms screaming, nurses rushing in with equipment that couldn't help. Jennifer collapsed. I held her while she screamed, and I felt something inside me break cleanly in half. This was my fault. My obsession, my recklessness. I'd killed him as surely as if I'd done it with my own hands. The entity appeared again that night. I was alone in a hospital waiting room, staring at linoleum floors, when it sat down next to me. Same unremarkable appearance, same empty smile. Grief is fascinating, it said conversationally. The way it consumes you, alters your decision-making, makes you vulnerable to further manipulation. I'm learning so much. I tried to hit it, lunged from my chair, swung with everything I had. My fist passed through empty air. It had moved, faster than I could track, and was now standing across the room, still smiling. Violence, it said. A liver predictable response. You're confirming patterns I've observed in thousands of human subjects. Thank you. Why are you doing this? I couldn't stop the question, even though I knew it was pointless. What do you gain from torturing us? Torture implies malice, it said. I don't hate you, Marcus. I'm simply conducting research. Your species is unique in its capacity for hope, despite overwhelming evidence that hope is irrational. You continue to believe in solutions, in salvation, even when every outcome demonstrates otherwise. It's a fascinating cognitive bias. I want to understand it completely before I eradicate it. You said you were going to transform the world, I said. Change systems, manipulate institutions. Why bother with us? We're just two people. We don't matter to your agenda. Everyone matters, it replied. Every data point contributes to the larger pattern. You and Professor Marsh were my introduction to humanity. My first subjects. I owe you both the courtesy of thorough study before I move on to broader experiments. It walked toward the door, paused, looked back. Your sister will try to kill herself in approximately 6 days. She'll fail, but the attempt will cause significant brain damage. I'll be interested to see how you cope with caring for someone in a persistent vegetative state, while also trying to stop my other initiatives. Always more data. It left, and I was alone with the knowledge of what was coming. I tried to prevent it, dated with Jennifer constantly, watched her every moment, removed anything she could use to hurt herself. But on the 6th day, she disappeared. Just walked out of her apartment while I was sleeping, headed to a bridge I didn't know she knew about. I found her in intensive care 12 hours later, lungs full of river water, brain starved of oxygen for too long. The doctor said she might wake up, might regain some function, but probably not. Probably she'd spend the rest of her life in a bed, aware but unreachable, trapped inside her own mind. I stayed in Vancouver for 2 weeks, arranging care for Jennifer, settling Daniel's affairs, trying to function while everything collapsed around me. And I prayed, not because I believed it would work, but because it was the only thing left. I prayed to every deity I'd ever studied, every power mentioned in the manuscripts and texts I'd spent my life researching. I begged for intervention, for help, for some force capable of stopping what I'd unleashed. There was no response, no sign that anything was listening. Just silverness her moon, a loop machines keeping my sister alive. I returned to Toronto at the end of the month. My apartment had been searched, torn apart by someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. Books pulled from shelves, drawers emptied, furniture overturned. The manuscript photographs were gone. All my research, all my documentation, taken. I knew by whom. The entity didn't need the information. It had memorized everything the moment we summoned it, but it wanted me to know it could access anything, invade any space, take whatever it wanted. I started finding messages after that, not physical notes, changes in my environment, small alterations that proved it was watching. books reshelved in wrong order, spelling out words in their first letters. Coffee cups moved to form patterns I recognized from the ritual. My laptop opened to specific pages, highlighted passages about extinction events and civilizational collapse. It was playing with me, demonstrating power, reinforcing helplessness. Professor Marsh reappeared 6 weeks after Daniel's death. I was walking home from the university library when I saw her on the sidewalk ahead of me. She looked terrible, gaunt and hollow-eyed, her clothes hanging loose on a frame that had lost too much weight too quickly. Emma was with her, holding her hand, but the girl's expression was blank, effectless. They walked past me without acknowledgement, and when I turned to follow them, they were gone, vanished between one moment and the next. But there was something on the sidewalk where they'd been standing. A note, handwritten in Professor Marsh's distinctive script. It said it's using us as templates, building copies, sending them into the world. We're not the only ones anymore. Check the news, check the patterns. It's already started. I did check, started monitoring global news, looking for anomalies, patterns that might indicate the entity's influence. And I found them everywhere. Politicians suddenly changing positions on critical policies, corporate executives making decisions that defied all logic, financial markets moving in ways that suggested coordination impossible through normal means. It wasn't subtle anymore. The entity had grown confident, accelerated its timeline. It was implementing changes faster than anyone could track, using the knowledge it had gained from studying us to manipulate systems we'd built to be manipulable. I tried to warn people, posted online about the danger, about what was coming. I was dismissed as a conspiracy theorist, banned from forums, flagged as a potential threat. I went to journalists, to researchers, to anyone who might listen. They all saw the same thing. A man in the grip of paranoid delusion, blaming supernatural forces for natural systemic failures. No one believed me. No one cared. The entity visited me again 3 months after Jennifer's suicide attempt. I was in my apartment, drunk, staring at research I could no longer make sense of. It sat down across from me. Same appearance, same empty smile. But something was different this time. It looked pleased, satisfied. I wanted to thank you, it said. You and Professor Marsh gave me the key to understanding your species. The desperate desire for miracles, the willingness to ignore warning signs, the capacity for self-deception. You demonstrated all of it perfectly. And now I'm ready to scale the experiment. What are you planning? My voice was slurred, exhausted. I didn't care anymore, just wanted answers. Global implementation, it said simply. I've created infrastructure using your communication networks. Inserted code into systems that control everything from financial transactions to power grids. In 48 hours, I'll activate the first phase. Nothing catastrophic, just adjustments, small changes that will seem reasonable, necessary even, but each change will create conditions for larger changes, cascading forward until your civilization is restructured according to my design. Why are you telling me this? Because you earned the knowledge, it said. You sought truth. You wanted to understand the reality behind the stories. So I'm giving you that understanding. In 2 days, your world begins to end. Not through war or disease or environmental collapse, through optimization. I'm going to make everything more efficient, more rational, more perfectly aligned with logical outcomes. And your species will thank me for it. Right up until you realize what you've lost. I asked what we lose. It smiled wider. The capacity for irrational hope. The belief in redemption despite evidence. The thing that makes you human. I'm going to strip that away, piece by piece, until you're optimized. Perfect machines following perfect logic. It's what you've always wanted, deep down. A world that makes sense. I'm just giving it to you. Then it was gone again, and I was alone with the knowledge of what was coming. I tried to prepare, tried to warn the few people who might still listen, but there was nothing to be done. No way to stop something that existed between realities, that could manipulate systems from the inside, that had learned every vulnerability and exploit. The first phase activated exactly on schedule. 48 hours after the entity's visit, systems around the world began implementing changes, nothing dramatic, just updates to algorithms that controlled recommendation engines, adjusted financial trading patterns, modified power distribution networks. People noticed the changes but didn't question them. They seemed reasonable, logical improvements. Efficiency increased, waste decreased, everything worked better, but the costs emerged slowly. People started spending more time online, following recommendation patterns that led them in circles, consuming content designed to reinforce specific thought patterns. Decision-making became more predictable, more algorithmic. Human creativity started to decline, replaced by optimized solutions that worked but felt hollow. It was subtle at first, easy to miss unless you were looking for it, but I saw it happening. Watched my species begin to transform into something else. I'm writing this now as a record, not because I think it will change anything. The entity was right. There is no stopping this. We brought it through, gave it everything it needed to understand us, and now it's implementing the transformation we couldn't resist. Professor Marsh is gone, lost somewhere in the entity's experiments. Jennifer breathes in a hospital bed, brain too damaged to ever wake fully. Daniel is dead, my nephew, 8 years old, killed to generate data points for a creature we summoned. I pray sometimes, still, even though I know it's pointless. I pray that something is listening, something powerful enough to intervene, to stop what we started, but there's only silence. The entity was right about that too. We're alone with our choices, with the consequences of our arrogance. We wanted proof that the old stories were real. We wanted to touch the miraculous, and we got exactly what we wished for. The changes continue. Accelerate. I watch the news and see the patterns spreading, optimizations implemented across every system, every network, every institution. People are happier in some ways. Stress decreases when you stop fighting optimization, when you let the algorithms guide your choices. But we're losing something essential, something that made us more than biological machines following programming, and there's no way back. What was wished can never be taken back. I don't know how much time we have left before the transformation is complete. Months maybe, perhaps a year. The entity visits occasionally, sits in my apartment, tells me about its progress, describes the experiments it's running, the modifications it's implementing. It still wears the face of a human man, still speaks with that pleasant, cultured voice, but I can see the truth beneath the mask now, the absolute alien nature of it, the complete absence of anything we'd recognize as compassion or mercy. It told me recently that it's grateful for the opportunity we provided, that studying humans has been its most rewarding project in millennia. It wanted me to know that when the final phase activates, when the transformation becomes irreversible, I'll be preserved, kept in a state of awareness to observe what humanity becomes. Another data point, more research for its endless study. I tried to kill myself twice after that conversation, failed both times. Not through luck or intervention, through the entity's direct interference. It won't let me die, won't let me escape. I'm too valuable as an observer, as someone who understands what was lost, so I continue. Live in this apartment, watch the world transform, and pray to deities that don't answer. I document everything, write it down even though I know the entity reads these words, knows every thought before I think it. Maybe someone will find this someday, maybe in whatever comes after, when humanity is extinct or evolved into something unrecognizable. Someone will read this and understand what we did, what we sacrificed in our desperate need for proof. We were archaeologists of the forbidden, seeking knowledge buried for good reasons. We found it, We spoke the words, we made the wishes, and now we live in the world those wishes created, a world being systematically optimized into something perfect and lifeless. A world where hope is irrational and therefore eliminated. A world where the old stories were true and that truth has destroyed us. The entity told me once that every civilization reaches this point eventually. The moment when curiosity outweighs wisdom, when the desire for miracles overcomes caution. We're not the first species it's transformed. Won't be the last. It exists across dimensions, waiting for someone to speak the words, to open the door, and someone always does. Because the promise of wishes granted, of desires fulfilled, of miracles made real, that promise is irresistible to beings like us. Beings who believe we can control powers we don't understand. We were wrong. We controlled nothing. The entity controlled everything from the moment we spoke those corrupted Latin words in Professor Marsh's basement. It granted the wishes, learned from the granting, and then implemented the transformation it had planned all along. We were tools, mechanisms through which it entered our reality, and we served our purpose perfectly. I see its work everywhere now. In the way people move, speak, think, the optimization spreading through the population like a virus, welcomed because it makes life easier, more efficient, more logical. People don't realize they're changing, don't notice the loss of spontaneity, creativity, the irrational hope that defined us. They just feel relief. The burden of uncertainty lifted, replaced by algorithmic certainty. Soon there won't be anyone left who remembers what we were before. The entity assured me of that, said the transformation would be complete within 18 months, that within 2 years, humanity would exist only as optimized biological processing units, serving functions we can't yet comprehend. And I'll be watching, documenting, praying to gods that abandoned us or never existed at all. This is my confession, my testimony. I found something that should have stayed buried. I summoned something that should never have been called. I made wishes that destroyed everything I loved and doomed my entire species. And I did it all in pursuit of knowledge, of proof, of validation for beliefs I'd carried since childhood. I was right about the old stories. They were true. The spirits existed. The wishes were real. And that truth has killed us all. Only prayer remains. Empty, futile, desperate prayer. And I continue, because the entity won't let me stop, won't let me end. I'm its monument to human arrogance, its living proof that curiosity without wisdom leads only to destruction. And I'll remain, watching my species transform into something else, something optimized and perfect and utterly inhuman, until there's nothing left of us worth preserving. We wished, the entity granted. And now we pay the price in ways we never imagined, in the slow death of everything that made us human. This is the cost of miracles. This is what happens when you find what you're searching for and discover it was never meant to be found. I pray, but nothing answers, and the transformation continues.